there are disadvantages to that, and I don't know how deep we want to get into it here, but HSA contributions, if made through your employer, they don't take Social Security tax out. So Social Security tax is like 7-ish% of your pay. If you make those contributions through your employer, through payroll, and you make under the wage base, which is roughly $170,000 this year, then by making those HSA contributions through payroll, you will actually save that Social Security tax. If instead, as you pointed out, you set up a separate HSA, which we have clients that do this, especially if you make over that wage base, saving the Social Security tax doesn't matter because there's no Social Security tax over that wage base. And so let's say your company uses an HSA that has high fees or requires you keep a lot of money in cash. These, what we think about, and maybe we should back up here a second, Ben, as far as how to actually handle the HSA. But if you open an HSA outside of your employer, you can add money from your savings account to it up to the annual limit. But if you are under that Social Security wage base, you will not save the Social Security tax on those contributions.
Well, what's happened since last time we got together? Seems like
government shutdown. What is it?
Well, government's still shut down. Day 35 or 36, I think.
The longest shutdown
I lost
in history.
Count. Yeah, longest shutdown in history, and nobody seems to care. The Bureau of Labor Statistics can't come out with the updated or the revised employment data, which nobody trusts anyway. So nobody trusts the labor employment data. I have been keeping an eye on ADP's figures, which frankly have been, pretty soft. That's something we can still look at.
The thing with unemployment is it's like people always forget these things are fractions, right? There's a numerator and a denominator. So it's like, okay, we're adding less jobs, which is what we found out of ADP today is like jobs hiring is slowing, but you also have a labor pool. Like when you shut down all of the immigration, the labor pool shrinks.
Yeah, that's true. Who knows what the BLS is going to come out with? They've got this kind of, I think it's bogus. It's hocus pocus, this birth death adjustment where they invent a number of businesses that were born and businesses that died. And they also have a seasonal adjustment, which honestly, I think it's like, why do we have a seasonal adjustment, Brent? Like, can't we just look at the data and just say, oh, it's winter or, oh, it's summer? Like, what are we that stupid where we can't figure out, the peaks and troughs of the seasonal employment cycle? I think that it's just an excuse for the BLS to get in there and monkey around with the numbers so people, they can, confuse the truth, or obfuscate the truth. But let me take my tinfoil hat off for a minute. My whole point is like the BLS data I always find kind of suspect. So, but that's new and relatively new. So we also have, Bitcoin going down from its peak of 125,000. Now it's below 100,000. So it's got a lot of Bitcoin investors spooked. So, I've been telling a lot of clients, actually, should I put a lot of money in Bitcoin? It's like, be very careful. It's a highly volatile asset with a, with a history of very substantial price declines. So, not trying to predict where it's going to go from here, but, the market's going up, gold's going up, Bitcoin's going down. So, buyer beware. Well, it's very volatile.
I want to get back to the government shutdown a little bit because I think it's prescient for like today's topic, which is really the cost of healthcare.
Yes.
Right. Like last podcast, we talked about benefits enrollment. And as a practicing advisor, I'm having a lot of meetings right now about benefit. I mean, this is enrollment season. So, I mean, just today on my task list later today is to look at a client's open enrollment information and figure out, okay, which family plan should we be on? How do we structure this? And that can be pretty lucrative to do, by the way. But when we talked last podcast, we mentioned at the end investing your HSA, and so there's just this big conversation around like, how much money do I need for healthcare? It's so interesting when I run a financial plan for any really prospective client or existing client. There's every financial planning software has a way to add in like a healthcare cost.
Yes.
And they have like their own estimator in there. And why is that? Because people don't have a clue.
Yeah.
Right. And by the way, there's a ton, and this can be such a limiting belief, I think, for people's retirement, because how many times have you heard somebody say, I'm not retiring until 65 because that's when I get Medicare?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And have they ever really actually quantified like what it costs to have insurance? And the reason this is related to the government shutdown is that the way that we kind of in the US, do you want to explain this?
Well, I can. Yeah. I mean, it's you're kind of on a roll. I'm letting you go, but it's essentially what the whole shutdown. Well, it's about a lot of things, but the big uh, headline thing is what to do about the Affordable Care Act subsidy. So right now, if you make under a certain amount, it's a scaling income. I don't know what you would call it, scale. Where if you make under a certain amount, you can potentially get your full premium, healthcare premium subsidized. And what they're debating on is, well, how much should that be? You know,
right. Or where should the income thresholds be?
Yes.
What happened was in pre-COVID, these thresholds were pretty low. And then COVID happened and there was policy put in place that increased them. So you had more people that got these subsidies on their healthcare, but they expire.
They do.
Right.
Yeah. You know, the interesting thing about the subsidy too, which is different than the way the government does things like the Social Security earnings test and whatnot, is the government just takes your word for it. So when you go and apply for health insurance outside of your employer, so for those of you who are buying your insurance through your employer, this is so kind of out of left field. You're not even thinking about this, but the way self-employed individuals or anybody who works for a small business that doesn't
or
have
somebody
health insurance,
who's retired before 65.
Yes, anyone who doesn't have employer coverage generally is going to have to find what's called an Affordable Care Act or ACA compliant plan, and they go to healthcare.gov or they call their broker and they take them through the professional equivalent of healthcare.gov. Some states like California have their own site where you go and you apply online.
The website that I use for my clients, and this isn't like a recommend. I mean, I'm sure there's other sites, but this is the one that I've had experience with, is healthsherpa.com. And you can go in and you can enter like your zip code, your family size, your income level, and it will show you what's available.
Yeah.
And the brokers that I've actually worked with that do this, I'll also use the same site.
That's great. I haven't heard of that one before. I personally just basically go to healthcare.gov and do price estimations there. But right now, the government shut down basically because we're not sure. Democrats obviously want a higher subsidy.
Yeah, the Democrats want to continue the subsidies, and the Republicans want to let them expire.
Want to cut them out. And I've got opinions on that, but we can go ahead and shift gears back to.
But the point is, healthcare is expensive. If you go look at like the average ACA premium out there. There was a stat that I saw. It was something like $26,000.
Actually, I'll put it up on the screen here. So if you look at the average price of a family of 4, I believe it is, for health insurance. Now this is without a subsidy. So is $26,993 as of 2025. Back in 1999, I remember this. I remember signing up for my health insurance in 2007 when I worked for a company, and I paid less than this. Like my insurance premiums were like $200 a month. These were the good days. Back in 1999, for a family of 4 is $5,800. Insurance costs have gotten out of control. People are fed up with it. I will, offer some color around like what some of my clients are doing to mitigate this cost, but I think we'll save that for a little bit later.
Well, I think for a lot of the people that we work with, it's, again, back to that limiting belief of I have to wait until 65, or you don't have to wait. I mean, yes, it's expensive, but that doesn't mean you have to do things. I mean, money ultimately is a means to an end. So you only have one life to live. I mean, if you want to pass away with a larger pile of money for the sake of working an extra 5 years, I'm certainly happy to back that agenda. It's just, if it costs, that's a family of 4. So I could go look at what the plan shows, but we have some data on this, but you can save for these things, right? And one of the things
Well, Brent, how are you going to save? Like if you're a family of four and you're getting hit with $27,000 a year, and just premiums. This is, by the way, this is before the out-of-pocket deductibles. Like how is there enough money to save?
I think my point is a little bit different.
Okay.
I'm not looking at this through the lens of somebody that's on the Affordable Care Act their whole life. Most of the clients that we work with, they have some kind of employer coverage, and they should be happy because the employer coverage, I mean, I'm looking at a lot of them in their paychecks right now. It is a lot less.
Don't you think their paychecks would be higher without this high end? My gripe here is I think that health insurance has gotten a little out of control in terms of the total cost. And I believe that we're in great need of reform around it. And I believe too, that it's gotten to the point where it's increasingly likely we're going to see some legislation or some reform around healthcare. That's
all great. But like, what do you do about it as an individual? Right. And I think what you try to do is position yourself to have, flexibility and financial strength. And so with a lot of the clients that we work with, again, back to the point here, it is expensive to not have employer health coverage, right? The Affordable Care Act that's kind of designed as the social safety net for healthcare is not cheap. And so if your goal is to, again, back to one of the things that I hear a lot when I'm talking to people pre-65 that want to retire, they're fearful of this cost, pre-65 before Medicare. And my point again is that, it's an expense and but we can plan for those things. And for a lot of the clients that we work with, if we start working with them at 35, 40, 45 years old, there are things that we can proactively do to bring that cost down a good bit through tax planning and essentially just managing the health plan that you use correctly.
Yeah. That I think that for the vast majority of people, as it currently stands, you're getting your coverage through your employer. Everything's gravy, everything's good. And we'll continue to ride that gravy train as long as we can. For someone who is retiring early, oh, by the way, I did want to comment too, like my primary concern with this is like if subsidies go completely away, which is not tenable in my opinion, that the average American can't handle 27,000. There's going to be no savings there. Like it's just not going to happen. What's going to happen then in that scenario is most people are just going to cancel their health plans. They're just going to wing it. And that is what I see most healthy people doing today, honestly. So, a lot of my clients that come to me, they're young, they're 20 to late 20s, early 30s or younger. And they're looking at these premium costs thinking, no way, why would I pay $1,500 a month, which is, what it would be for some of these people. If you're a high income earner, and you're just buying an individual plan for yourself, it's quite expensive. They're thinking, well, I'm just throwing good money after bad here. So what they're doing is actually, taking the risk in house. They're just paying for things in cash. Which has its risks all on its own. I'm not suggesting that people do this, like to each their own, but that's ultimately what people are deciding to do, which is why this risk pool is getting winnowed out.
Well, what's happening is there are, so we've been talking a lot about the ACA, but there are private plans. You can, if you don't have employer coverage, and depending on your state, every state's different, there are private plans that you can get into, but you have to qualify. You have to answer, you have to sit on the phone with somebody, answer a bunch of yes or no questions about like health issues, and they'll say, they'll decline you or not. And
well, tell us some more about that. Is that what you do?
Well, it depends. I mean, you can, gosh, again, for a lot of the people that we work with, they have high income W-2 jobs, benefits packages, and these things are, like I was saying before, more of a concern when they retire or when they're out of work. But if you are, not covered by an employer plan, let's say you're self-employed or your job doesn't have health insurance for whatever reason, and you're kind of shoved into the abyss that is kind of the complexity of the healthcare system, you really should have a good health insurance broker It's important that you work with somebody that can do both Affordable Care Act, ACA plans, but also private plans.
Yes.
Because there are situations where you can kind of break things up. You could say, okay, well, spouse and kids are covered under private plan because essentially all those yes or no questions they can answer no to. And then
maybe but you can't.
Other spouse has to. And so maybe one spouse is on an ACA plan and the other spouse is on a private plan. I know for us, we were on a private plan, but then my wife is pregnant. Right. Or well, we recently had a baby, right? Or was pregnant. And so we had to make changes to get on the ACA plans. And back to your point on why this is unaffordable is that what the ACA does, and I think this is a very noble cause, is to provide anybody health care no matter what your health level.
Yes.
And so what happens is you have a bunch of like, if you're not able to qualify for the private plan, you're forced into the ACA. And so what happens is you get this, from a risk pool standpoint, they have a lot lower health. So my pregnant wife gets ACA coverage. We have a baby. We have a tradition. I mean, it's not cheap health insurance by any means, but it's defined and we have a deductible and kind of like you would, right? But there's a cost to that on the system, right? And that's what's gotten out of hand.
You can game it. So back to your example, like, your wife being pregnant, having the baby, it is quite possible to become pregnant. Well, obviously it's quite possible. and then you buy you buy like a premium plan, like a platinum level ACA plan that covers that pregnancy. And then you give birth to the child in March and then you cancel the plan.
Right.
So the insurer gets basically 3 months of premiums. You get potentially $30,000, $40,000 of benefits, and you cancel the plan. Well, who pays for that?
Right.
So it's not rocket science. These companies none of them are altruistic. They're all for profit. Just look at their numbers. So that's why the
make lots of money.
Premiums are skyrocketing because people are gaming the system. And candidly, I can't hardly disagree with them because what a lot of healthy people are doing, they're just winging it. And, they are, if the proverbial crap hits the fan, they're signing up during open enrollment, which I think we're in right now.
Yeah.
And then you're no pre-existing conditions. So you can go ahead and do it. And if your health is really poor, and you are unable to work, well, you get full subsidy, baby. So you might as well just free ride. And that's why premiums are skyrocketing. And this thing is going to continue to spool out of control until something breaks on it. And I think my point is we're approaching that. So as we talk about to our listeners here, like, what do you do to get ahead of this? Keep that in mind that I have a lot of conviction, and I think you probably do too, that the healthcare system as we currently have it, I think in the next 5, definitely in the next 10 years, it's going to look very different.
Yeah.
That said, it's still important to save ahead because the way to narrow variability in your retirement plan or any plan is just to have savings. Like the more money you have, the more options you have.
Well, or have a process of that. Like I always love the quote that the value of the plan, like the value of the plan is worthless, but the value of the planning process is invaluable.
Yeah.
Right. And so when it comes to like having a plan, for clients that we have, like I'll just use an example. I looking at the way that the financial planning software we use anticipates this. If I have a client who's 35 today and they retire at 62 years old, and they were using what is assumed, like right now in this plan, it's assuming exactly what we're talking about. It's assuming no changes to the system, yada yada. Right? It assumes that in today's dollars, they're going to spend $26,000 a year on medical for those first few years of retirement before they hit Medicare. And then those numbers are inflated at like 6%. So that by the time they actually get there, it's an even bigger number. I can get it here in a minute. But the point being, I don't know that like that is going to be wrong, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's just no question that the way that the actual amount of medical spending they have in retirement is not going to be what I have in the plan 30 years prior, right? But does that mean you have nothing? I mean, you have to have something in there, because ultimately having a process to plan for it allows you to be flexible and to pivot and to make adjustments as the policy changes. And I don't think any of my clients would be upset if the policy changed in their favor. And now we've got a little bit more money saved than needed. And now we can work on some things, which we can talk about later pertaining to HSAs in particular, to back some previous money out if that was needed.
Yeah. So the one caveat I will mention, because you brought up HSAs, is when you to contribute to an HSA, you absolutely have to have a high deductible savings account, a high deductible health insurance policy, health insurance plan. And there are specific IRS guidelines around this, and it must be ACA compliant. That's the other caveat.
Right.
So
not all high deductible plans actually are.
So exactly. So you can't really gamify the health insurance marketplace and also still contribute to an HSA.
But I think what happens is people are afraid of the term high deductible. Like the idea of a high deductible is a scary notion. So, across the board, what we see is people kind of gravitate to the low deductible. It's almost like a flex when you look at somebody and say, I don't have a high deductible. We have a really good medical insurance plan. I don't pay anything to the doctor. We have to ask yourself, like, what are you paying for that plan? I was literally just looking at a plan earlier today. There's a high deductible and a low deductible option. And the high deductible plan has a higher deductible. It was like $4,000. The low deductible plan has a deductible of like $1,000. But the difference in how much the person would pay throughout the year for the health insurance was $4,000.
Yeah.
So you pay an extra $4,000 for the privilege of having a $3,000 lower deductible. How does that make any sense? But I'm sure there are people at this company who are selecting the low deductible plan because they feel mentally comfortable with the idea of a low deductible. And so, I think, again, with proper planning and with foresight and again, you can't, it's hard to do this if you're paycheck to paycheck, because we're a high deductible. It's great to save $4,000 a year on premiums, but if that money doesn't end up in your bank account, then I guess when you get the $4,000 expense, that still sucks.
Yeah,
right?
no
So
doubt.
you have to be responsible, right? This is why having a plan, having a planner, having just something to hold you accountable is so important. But ideally, we put you in a position where if you had an unexpected, hit to your deductible, there's money set aside for that through potentially the HSA, which we can get to.
Yeah, and I do want to add some clarity on that. So while you were talking, I looked up the definition per the IRS of what a high deductible plan is. Currently for 2025, it's minimum deductible is $3,300 annually per family, but there's also a max out of pocket range too. So the plan can't exceed a max out of pocket expense of $16,600. The numbers are different for individuals, but
here's the thing.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, if your plan is HSA compliant, you don't need to know these rules.
Yeah.
You will be offered an HSA, right? Like when you're signing up through your employer,
most of the time
they will offer you an HSA when it comes with it,
Yeah.
generally speaking.
I will say too, like just because your employer offers an HSA doesn't mean that's the HSA you have to go with. That's generally the one you have to choose in order to get the employer contribution to it. But it's fully your account. So, you can open up an HSA anywhere and contribute to it, so long as you don't, go over the annual cap. But
there are disadvantages to that. And I don't know how deep we want to get into it here, but HSA contributions, if made through your employer, they don't take Social Security tax out. So Social Security tax is like 7-ish% of your pay. If you make those contributions through your employer, through payroll, and you make under the wage base, which is roughly $170,000 this year, then by making those HSA contributions through payroll, you will actually save that Social Security tax. If instead, as you pointed out, you set up a separate HSA, which we have clients that do this, especially if you make over that wage base. Saving the Social Security tax doesn't matter because there's no Social Security tax over that wage base. And so let's say your company uses an HSA that has high fees or requires you keep a lot of money in cash. These, what we think about, and maybe we should back up here a second, Ben, as far as how to actually handle the HSA. But nevertheless, if you open an HSA outside of your employer, you can add money from your savings account to it up to the annual limit. But if you are under that Social Security wage base, you will not save the Social Security tax on those contributions. And so, that is certainly worth weighing. But I think we should back up a little bit here. And, because I'll give a little bit of context. I was at a presentation yesterday. I talked to a local company here in Cincinnati, large company. The people that I was talking with were successful sales professionals, all have W-2s and employer health insurance and HSA access and that kind of thing. And this was one of the more frequent discussions that we had is like, how should you be handling your HSA? And I just think this is really, really widely misunderstood because I don't know what your experience is, but anytime I've ever gone to the doctor or the dentist or something like that, and I look down and there's some kind of expensive cost, the first thing out of the person's mouth in front of me is, well, you can use your HSA card if you need, right?
Yeah.
And for our clients, like when we plan with clients, as long as they are in a financially strong, they have good income, they have the ability to save money, we actually advocate that instead of contributing to their HSA and then using it, they actually contribute to it, invest it, and then spend money on health insurance or health expenses separately with other money until the health and the HSA gets big enough.
Yeah, and the rationale behind that, I think, is demonstrated by these scenarios. Did you want to get into these scenarios?
Well, I think we should talk a little bit about the math of compounding. Like why, what do I mean by when the account gets big enough, right? So let's just use basic math here. HSA contribution limits in 2025, $8,550 for a family, $4,300 for a single plan. So let's say you are putting, let's round numbers, $8,000 a year in this HSA, and every year you go to the doctor and you use most of that. So your HSA net, by the time you add 8,000 and maybe take out 4, you might at the end of the year have 3, 4, 5,000 bucks in it.
Yes.
Right. Now let's say you are thoughtful enough to invest that, right? Which, by the way, your HSA doesn't generally automatically invest. So unlike your 401k, which a lot of times will, you have to go in there and proactively invest it, right? So let's say you do that. And let's say that, I think we've talked on this podcast, historical market average is like 10.5%. So let's say you make 10%, right? 10% of $4,000 is how much? $400, right? You never, like, the power of investing is that once you have enough money, the 10% starts to really matter.
Yes.
Right. So you're kind of doing yourself a disservice by putting the 8,000 in and then taking money out, when instead, if you could afford to put the 8,000 in and leave it there, invest the whole 8,000. Well, now 10% of 8,000 is $800. Now next year you put another $8,000. You fast forward 3, 4, 5, 6 years.
10 years, $4,300 a year is $77,566.
So what we try to get clients to do is that we want them to build the HSA balance big enough to where when you do some rough math and assumptions with investment returns minus, using money out of it, essentially you can, once you're done loading it up, so to speak, I have clients for the rest of their lives basically just use the HSA for everything. And between them contributing to the HSA, because we don't stop contributing to the HSA, there's some very good tax benefits to it. So you continue to contribute to the HSA, you leave the HSA invested for the most part, minus some cash for this year's medical expenses, and then any and all medical expenses now come out of your HSA. And the goal is to be able to not only fund all of your medical expenses over the course of the rest of your career, right? So maybe your HSA is loaded up by the time you're 35, 40 years old. So you use this thing for 25 years over the rest of your career, but then you also want to have enough money in the HSA to fund medical and retirement, which most, it's important people understand that you can use the HSA for medical expenses all the way to and through retirement, completely tax-free.
Mm-hmm. And once you hit 65, you can't contribute to it anymore. So it's, but that's really a function of the fact that you're no longer covered by a high deductible plan anymore.
Right.
So you're officially on Medicare at that point. So there's, you're ineligible for contributions. So,
but I'll say I know I'm beating a dead horse here, but like, this is, HSAs are so widely misunderstood. Like young people don't know to invest them, don't know not to use them. And then people that are in their 50s kind of discount the contribute because they're like, oh, I don't have that long to contribute. Well, I would argue that makes it even more important. If you're 55 years old and you've got 10 years to contribute and you can do, $8,000 a year, you could put some pretty meaningful money away in those last handful of years. And every year that you don't, if you're using it improperly, is a big difference.
Do you think the HSA is more important to contribute to than even like a Roth IRA for a young person?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. In terms of when I was at Fidelity, they had something in that called the savings hierarchy.
Yeah.
Where do your dollars go first and next? Okay. And most people kind of intuitively understand that the company match in their 401k is very important.
Yes.
Right. So that is at the top of the savings hierarchy. But the next step, that once you've got your 401k company match, the next step in the savings hierarchy is to put enough money in your HSA to cover your planned medical expenses.
What's the logic behind that?
Well, if they're planned medical expenses, you're not actually using the HSA for investing at that point. You're using it simply for tax savings, right? Assuming you have, more dollars than that, you would build emergency savings next. So actually establish the quote 3 to 6 months of savings that we all, suggest. And then once you've got, you're doing your 401k match, you filled up your HSA with enough money for medical expenses, you're capable of putting 3 to 6 months of savings in. Now you kind of go, okay, where do I go next? And the most tax efficient thing you can do next is your HSA. Is max out the HSA, right? And then from there, we don't even need to get into that on this podcast, but you have lots of other options as far as, do you max your 401k? Do you do a Roth IRA? Do you save in non-retirement accounts? How do you, I kind of grimace as I say, do you buy like permanent life insurance? Which is not something that we typically like, but
no. So I'm not going to go so bold as to say, you should absolutely max out the HSA over the Roth. I think every plan is different.
Why would you? Let me pose a question. Why would you put money in the Roth as opposed to the HSA?
Because the Roth can be used for, and I'm talking about a young person. So here, the HSA I think becomes more compelling the older you get. And the sweet spot for it is, once you kind of hit late 30s, early 40s, because then you've got enough time to compound tax free, but then you're also in your higher income earning years where you could really use that tax deduction. I think for a younger person, they're not really thinking about healthcare. They're not really highly motivated to save, and they're also more likely to use that money, because there's no age limit to spending the money out of the HSA. So I'm thinking behaviorally, I would rather a young person contribute to a Roth because there's like this psychological lockup period for that. It's like, oh, that's for retirement. Don't want to touch that. Whereas the HSA, yeah, you get the tax deduction, but it's not so meaningful when your income is lower, although it is good. I'm not going to deny that. But the thing that mainly concerns me is that there's a temptation to spend that money. I am a perfect example of this. I did. I contributed to an HSA for years. And guess how much HSA money I have? I would have a lot more if I could contribute to one. I don't have a high deductible healthcare plan, and I can color that in if you'd like. But the reason why I don't have one is because, back when I was younger and funds were very tight, I didn't want to withdraw my HSA. I had to withdraw from my HSA.
Sure.
So my wife and I have 4
Would it have
children.
been better if that money was in a Roth IRA?
I think it would still be there today if it were in a Roth IRA, yes.
But would you have been in credit card debt? Because you were going to spend the money either way, right?
Well, I can't answer that question because technically if I didn't I would have had a probably a more comprehensive policy. So my point is I'm not trying to rain on your parade. I'm just saying, it's very case specific.
Well, as is everything.
Yeah.
But I think if I paint with a broad brush, I would say HSA priority over Roth IRA. And one of the rules that, and this actually came up yesterday, and I think it's really important for people to understand, there's a rule called the shoebox rule.
Yes.
With your HSA. And it basically allows you to take, so let's say, I'll just use myself as an example here. Okay. I have been contributing to my HSA since I was 26. First medical plan, maxed out the HSA. And I have done exactly what I would tell clients and everybody on this podcast to do. I have put the money in. It has been invested. I have not taken money out of it. And in 2021, my son was born, right? And in 2022, I started this business. So I faced a decision in 2021. Do I want to use my HSA to help me fund, the costs of my son being born, or do I use other money? And I ended up using other money. And here's why. Because what the shoebox rule allows you to do is it actually allows you at any point in the future to go back and take money out of your HSA tax-free for medical expenses incurred years in the past. So if my deductible when I had my son was $6,000, we spent $6,000. I did not take that out of the HSA. I started my business the next year. Let's say had the business gotten into a place where I really would have needed that HSA money, I could have then gone and taken the $6,000 out of the HSA tax-free. And the important thing is that I have receipts, records, some way of supporting that was a qualified, HSA expense that was incurred, at some point in the past. So the shoebox rule, I think people there's a part of people that takes the money out of the HSA because they're afraid if they don't now while they have the expense that they won't be able to take it out later. And I think what I try to tell people to do is, at least for the large medical expenses, like a child being born or something like that, save the receipts somewhere, or maybe make a file on your computer or an email inbox or just some way to track it and keep a tab of it. And if at some point in the future you ever find yourself really needing money out of the HSA for one way or one reason or another, you have some cover to go take a larger sum out of the HSA, even if there's not a qualified, a healthcare expense that year. I think understanding that would give people more confidence to maybe leave money in the HSA and use the HSA, contribute to the HSA.
Yeah, well, we can essentially summarize the past, I think, 20 minutes with this statement. If you qualify for an HSA, you should probably be contributing to it. So, and I do want to highlight
let's get
why
into
that
some
is.
of these.
So, these are crystal ball numbers. So Fidelity's brightest minds got together and tried to forecast to the best of their ability the future and what it's going to cost, what healthcare is going to cost someone. Now, what they typically do in this scenario is they look at the past decade of trends. So they look at, what's the cost of healthcare inflated at the past decade, and they extrapolate that over the future all the way to your life expectancy. So, I don't really know exactly the inflation data that Fidelity's used. Most companies are using between 4% and 5%. So I assume it's somewhere between there. But we put the link in the show notes so you can go and click on it and, try it out for yourself. Yeah, it's a pretty cool online resource. I'd recommend going to it.
You plug in your spouse, if you have one, your ages, when you expect to retire, and it gives you essentially how much you should plan to need.
It takes into account, Medicare benefits and the costs of Part B and D and all those that alphabet soup, the premiums and the average cost of copays and that sort of thing. So, all right. If you're aged, we took a couple, male and female, age 35, who are going to retire at age 67. It is estimated that they're going to spend in their retirement, from the date they retire to the date they retire officially from life, is $606,000. So it's not an insignificant. That's just healthcare expenses, and it's not an insignificant amount. So when you take my number, which is if you contribute $4,300 a year for 10 years at 10.5% rate of return, you end up with about $77,000. So if I continued that formula, in fact, let me go ahead and do that. Let me just.
And while you're
Mhm.
doing that, I want to point out, because again, earlier I mentioned that a lot of the people that we talk to that are thinking about retiring before 65, but are a little bit nervous to, one of their biggest fears is the added medical cost. And
Mhm.
so I ran the same calculator, but with people that are 35 years old today, but planning to retire at 62 instead of 67.
Mhm.
Right. So in your scenario, they retire at 67, they need 606,000. In my scenario, they retire at 62, 776,000. So it's a difference of $170,000. So I guess my
That's
argument is
interesting.
at
Uh,
35 years, like back to my
yeah.
argument is like, you know, I do want, like, one of our jobs as planners is kind of empowering people to control their own destiny through their
Mhm.
finances. Right. And my point is, like, don't let government policy of when Medicare kicks in dictate when the heck you're going to retire. If $170,000 is the difference, and you are working with an advisor, you are capable of saving, like, you can put together a plan to bridge that difference. And okay, yes, it's more expensive. Like, what's more important? And I'm not saying you shouldn't work till 65. Some people find a lot of purpose in work. We have lots of people that like to continue to work, but don't make the decision over something as silly as, Medicare policy.
Mhm.
It's just it's tough, because I think our job is to put people in positions where they don't.
You want to be in a position of option, and
Yeah.
that I think is what saving for a specific goal like healthcare and retirement is going to do. I do want to bring up that number that I came up with. So if you did 30 years of HSA contributions for at $4,300, so this is not even factoring for the inflation that adjustment of the HSA contribution limit increase. You end up with over $1 million, which actually exceeds the goal. That actually brings up my point. Like, it's case specific. You don't want to just blindly plow a
You
bunch
don't
of money.
want too much money. Too much
Yes.
money in the HSA is also a problem.
Yes.
But there is a kind of a loading period at the beginning that makes a lot of difference.
Yes.
But yeah, absolutely. After the first 5 to 10 years of contributions,
Hmm.
the goal is, like, you're draining the account and trying to use it because you're trying to tamp down on any excess money in there. And as your advisor, what we're
Hmm.
doing is we're kind of constantly revisiting that projection. Okay, you need $600,000. Your HSA has $70,000 in it today. In our in our estimation, you're going to contribute $8,500 a year adjusted for inflation. You're going to pull out $5,000. Are you overfunded? Are you underfunded? And then we can pivot from there. And back to the shoebox rule, we can use the shoebox rule. Let's say you get too much money in the HSA, and that math starts to look, you know, you have $1 million and you need 600,000. That's where we would you just start taking money out for past expenses. And by the way, I also think it's worth noting, let's say worst case scenario, you've overfunded your HSA, you're retired. You actually can, after 65 years old, use the money from the HSA for any expense. You just have to pay taxes, just like you would on a 401k,
Hmm.
right? 401k goes in pre-tax, HSA goes in pre-tax, 401k comes out with taxes applied. HSA, if used for medical expenses, comes out no taxes applied. If used for other things after 65, you just pay the taxes, just like the 401k. Where you get hosed is if you die with a large HSA balance. HSAs are notoriously not estate friendly.
Yeah.
And so, that's really the risk is you're 40 years old, you've got a couple $100,000 in an HSA and you pass away. It's going to be kind of the least efficient, one of the less efficient assets that your people would inherit.
Well, I want to shift gears a little bit away from the HSA because these, we're big fans, and you should incorporate this into your financial plan. It's not an easy, just like, hey, just max it out every year and be done. You need to be more thoughtful than that. But I do want to address the topic of what should people do more immediately other than the HSA to kind of um, help them secure healthcare and retirement that is not going to put them into the poorhouse. And I want to include the discussion of long term care into this because I get this question a lot. Clients are just panicking. They don't want to spend their money because they envision some future where they're going to need, millions of dollars to, have someone take care of them at an older age. They're terrified of this, and they're also terrified of actually spending that money. So not only are they preserving that money in their portfolio, so reluctant to spend because they're envisioning this like phantom emergency that's going to happen, that's on the horizon. But if that does happen, they're also, like just super anxious about that because they feel gutted that the money is going to a nursing home versus their loved
Kids.
ones, their kids, or like their church or something. So I do want to unpack that a little bit because it is on the minds of a lot of people. HSAs are great and all, but let's face it, like if you're 62 years old right now and you got maybe a tiny amount in HSA or nothing, which is the majority of people, you're like, what do you do to actually retire? So one thing that I want to point people to is, if this happens to be you, let's say you're not quite 65, you don't qualify for Medicare, but you do qualify for being frustrated with your current employer and you want to retire. What do you do? How do you plan around that? There's multiple approaches, and you alluded to one earlier, and that is private health insurance. So I find a lot of people looking into shared cost healthcare networks. I do not endorse these because they're kind of unregulated. Definitely do your own research, as they say, but they are solutions that I have found people use effectively. The risk of these health cost share networks is that they run out of money. Like there's no regulatory body that's governing these things. They're all like private, not-for-profit groups. They're almost like, I don't know really how they operate legally, but I think they're considered like clubs, if you will. So, but I have worked with people that have successfully used these. They are an option, not my favorite option, but they are an option.
Yeah, the ones that I've seen have been cumbersome because it's like a lot of receipt submissions. And
actually, I think a lot of them have figured that out. So, this is not a plug, but the company that I'm aware of that I look at a lot, Crowd Health, they actually have their own billing department and everything. It's actually pretty slick. But again, these are not regulated. Your insurance policy it's actually not even an insurance policy. You're just a member, and your money, and you contribute like a membership fee, and that money is evaporated. It's no longer yours. There's not this like policy benefit. All it is like a loose promise, if you will, that the group has given to you. So that promise is only as good as the liquidity of the company or it's not even a company of the organization that you're a part of. I don't think the issue so much is claims. I think it's more still like, is the money going to be there when you need it? That the other option you can go into is these have been very popular companies like United Healthcare, Humana. They do offer these like indemnity style plans. I've seen a pickup in popularity with these. They're like the opposite of health insurance. So, with traditional health insurance, you cover up to the first like X amount. It's known as the deductible. So, and then the insurance company more or less picks up the tab from there. So with an indemnity plan, it's the opposite. The insurance company will pick up the tab of the first X amount of dollars, and then it's up to you. These are terrible style plans for covering catastrophic health problems. They're pretty decent if what you're dealing with is just like health maintenance stuff. So what I see people do is they buy these indemnity plans and they couple it with like a critical illness insurance policy. I own one of these myself, where, if anyone in my family falls majorly ill, there's like a balloon payment that we receive. Now, it's not, what you do with this is you couple it with an ACA open enrollment window. See what I'm talking about? It's gamifying the system.
But we have the private plan that we used before is an indemnity style plan, but it actually has a rider on it that kind of does the same thing. So if there was, hey, most situations, here's what we pay for a doctor visit, here's what we pay for this surgery, that surgery, you're on the hook for the rest of it.
Yes.
But if I had a, $40,000 medical expense or something that was unforeseen, there's like a rider in there that allows you to cut it off.
But you are right about that. You have to qualify for these. So these are not ACA plans. So they do not cover pre-existing conditions. So if you have a health problem or you don't like the games that are being played with these private policies to kind of work around the pre-existing condition clause that's causing all these high risk insurance policyholders to go into the ACA plans, thus boosting the premiums, you kind of have to fight that battle. You have to buy an ACA compliant plan through, you brought up a great website before. I'll just plug it again, which is healthsherpa.com. So,
it's very user friendly.
Yeah.
I mean, you can go there without applying for anything. You can enter in your information. It'll show you what plans are available.
Yep.
But I want to stress, it's still important to work with a broker because like here in Cincinnati, we have Cincinnati Children's. And if you have kids in Cincinnati that want to go to Cincinnati Children's, you have to be very picky as far as which ACA plan you get on. And it's just very important to work with a broker who kind of knows what they're doing as they click through. These people are paid commissions, but you do not pay additional premiums to fund their commissions.
The policies are universal regardless of where you buy them. So the commission pricing structure is just built into
whether
every
you sign up yourself
or
the broker does it for you. You pay the exact same amount.
So you're paying for it anyway.
And basically the broker is just able to walk through it with. I mean, do your own research up front. I'm very, that's all fine, but I think it's important that you link up with somebody that can walk you through it and take some ownership on submitting the process.
Yeah. And as far as I'm concerned, that latter option is the most expensive option. But even so, with most plans that I run with the subsidy, now granted, that's in the air right now. I think if the subsidy is removed, these policies are going to be unaffordable for most people. But assuming, I think there's going to be some agreement eventually. I don't know when. You can't predict these things. Most of these ACA style plans, they're pretty comparable. They're slightly more expensive to like a Cadillac Medicare policy, but they're pretty comparable. I would gauge, for an individual, you can expect to spend. Now, this is just a generic range here. Like if you're nursing diabetes or something, that a chronic illness, it could be significantly more. But I'm finding these to kind of land around $6,000 to $7,000 a person per year, which sounds like a lot, and it is a lot. But if all you have to do is fund that for 5 years, if $7,000 a year is cratering your retirement plan, you can't afford to retire early.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm saying is like let's not try to blame health and like there's something to be said for being proactive and planning ahead and saving and investing and you should be in a position where $100,000 swing one way or another from increased cost of health isn't going to like make or break your ability to retire. Hopefully
it shouldn't. So if you've properly planned for it, some people, they completely wing their retirement and they don't even run a retirement plan until they're 62. And the only reason they're doing that is because that's the earliest date they can file for Social Security.
And I'm not trying to pick on that person in your example. I guess what I'm saying is, like you said, if the first time you run a financial plan is when you're in your early 60s, like don't be surprised when you don't have flexibility.
Yes.
Right. The purpose of building a plan early and reviewing it often is that by the time you reach some of the, like, again, the plan itself is going to be wrong, but the process of revisiting the plan over time allows you to set yourself up with choices, and choices are everything. I can think of so many people that I've talked to where like they kind of get shoved around in the world because they haven't put themselves in a position to have choice. And some things are completely out of your control, right? Like health is one of those things, you could get a terrible health diagnosis tomorrow, but certain things like saving and investing and financial planning, those are in your control.
Yeah. Now, something that's out of your control to some extent is, whether you're going to need long-term care. and I do want to touch on this, not dwell on it too long, but it is a significant concern for a lot of people. And I think that there is also a huge contingent of what we call, I'm gonna air quote this, financial advisors out there that are peddling, essentially cash value life insurance, permanent life insurance policies as long-term care policies. And, they're kind of leaning into that whole fear sale. It's like, well, you don't want to give all your money to the government, which, by the way, is not how it works. But I do want to explain how long-term care works, where long-term care insurance, in my opinion, fits, where it doesn't fit. And I'm also just going to give you my general opinion on long-term care insurance. So
Before you do that,
mhm,
we'll put a link to this in the show notes. But there is a free calculator. We're all about free calculators
mhm,
that you can use. Calculator online that is put out through Genworth
yes,
and Care Scout, and you can actually go into this calculator. You can put zip codes. You can put like when you think you're going to need long term care, and you can look at whether you want to look at the cost on an annual basis, monthly basis, et cetera. And you can actually see a rough idea of like what to expect these costs actually are. And so we'll leave that in the show notes that give you kind of an idea. And a lot of times when we do these things, when we're looking at these in plans, this gives us a good guideline on like, well, how much might this cost?
mhm,
Because
yes.
you don't like, I want to let you talk, but you don't want to, again, wing it. Like how much long-term care insurance do you
No,
need?
don't. I'm not going to suggest we wing it, and I'm also not going to completely discount the value of long term care insurance. I think the right long term care insurance policy works very well, but I also don't think that everybody needs to buy it. I think that that is that's just a one size fits all type of recommendation, and it's very rarely the case. So, but let me first preface this with the common statement that every advisor starts with when you talk about long term care, and that is it's not really covered by Medicare. So Medicare does cover some, I think, up to the first 1,000 days. If I'm not 1,000 days, 100 days. Sorry, it's like the first 100 days Medicare covers. After that, essentially doesn't cover it because you're pretty much your daily copay is so high. Um, but Medicare does essentially get a lot of people through like a surgery with a rehabilitation period of, let's say, 60 days or so. So Medicare does a pretty good job at that. But where it doesn't do a good job is anything that lasts longer than 60 days. And that's where long-term care can be pretty useful. But most long-term care policies sold today have 6 month or 180-day waiting period. So they don't even kick in. So, and that's something to pay attention to. So when you're considering a long-term care insurance policy, the most likely time you are to use that is after a major surgery like knee replacement, or maybe you have a heart bypass, something like that. Um, it's during that rehabilitation period, and you go into a long-term care facility for rehab, and then you come out. So it's these short-term spurts early on in life where the right long-term care policy is very useful. Um, the ones that I am typically a little bit less, I kind of frown at them, are these ones with a 180-day waiting period. They're linked to permanent life insurance. Have you seen these?
Yeah.
They call long-term care hybrids.
Hybrid policies. Yes.
All right, and these things have the advisors say, oh, they're guaranteed to pay out. Yes, but you're also guaranteed to make the insurance company a profit. So let's just do the math here.
I guess on average.
So where the long-term care policies that I think are good, but they're also the most expensive, are the ones with a short elimination period. 90 days or less are ideal. Probably not less than 60, but 90 days is pretty good. And they only cover long-term care. And what I mean by long-term care, I'm talking like at-home care, assisted living, skilled nursing, that sort of thing. So these are very broad coverage. I also like them to have inflation riders on them of at least 4%, and per day daily benefits, ideally with no cap, of $300 a day or more.
And
So,
do you have like I know a lot of these
Mhm.
long-term care policies, they pay out for like a certain period of time, right? So
Yeah,
it'd be
well,
up
they'll
to,
have, and this is a great way to kind of trim premium costs a little bit. Is most long term care stays are not greater than 3 years. So if you don't necessarily need to have like an uncapped policy. In fact, most that I've seen today don't even have that provision. They typically range between like 2 years and up to 5 years. Again, I'm speaking very broadly here. There's a lot of different policies out there, but these things have gotten extraordinarily expensive too. So it's not a no-brainer solution. And it's almost to the point where back in the day, like when Genworth, you mentioned Genworth was giving these things out almost for free. I've reviewed these policies from Genworth, and the policyholders now are every 3 years getting like 30, 50%, sometimes 100% premium increases, which Genworth can justify with the state Department of Insurance, because you have to generally in every state submit for approval to the insurance regulator your justification for premium increases. You can't just arbitrarily do it. A lot of people don't realize that. Like this is state approved, and Genworth mispriced these policies so drastically that the state's just like, yeah, we see the sense in it. But back in the late '90s, early 2000s, these things were very popular. They're very benefit rich, and I commonly I do this probably 3 times a year. I review a notice that my clients get saying, are you willing to change your policy? Here's the reduction in premium if you do, and those are always interesting problems, but that's not the policy you can get today. The policies you can get today, they're highly scrutinized. So you're going to go through a rigorous underwriting period.
oh my gosh. And it's so obnoxious because the things that get like the insuring the risk of you dying is different than insuring the risk of you living a long time but needing care.
Yes.
Right. And so they get picky about weird stuff.
Very picky. Family history is very important. So if you have a family history of dementia, Alzheimer's, pretty much not going to get approved. It's not the same everywhere. There might be but your premium's going to be sky high.
But it's like the thing that they're worried about is not you dying.
Yeah,
they're actually worried about you living too long with medical issues.
They want you to die.
Right. But so it's kind of, and so you get back to these hybrid policies, right?
Mm-hmm.
It is interesting. Like this policy both ensures you dying and you living too long. So
I kind of have a different opinion than most advisors on this, and that is what I found is that the premium's gotten so high, and the only way to reduce the premiums to where most people don't have acid reflux when they're looking at them is you got to cut the benefits out. So you got to either lengthen the waiting period to 180 days, which pretty much cuts out a lot of value for the client, I think. Or they'll limit the daily benefit, or they'll limit the duration of the benefit. Somehow, some way, they cut the benefits of the policy. The client, unfortunately, from what I've seen, doesn't really pay attention to those benefit cuts because they don't know. They don't compute. They're not looking at long-term care costs and what does it actually cost to do it. Their broker just tells them, here's your long-term care insurance policy. And they think, oh, okay, I'm covered now. Not really. In fact, you might be worse off than where you started. So, look, if you're looking into long-term care, I'd encourage you to kind of reach out to us. Our contact information is in the show notes. This is a problem I'm really passionate about. I love solving it for people. I might suggest the long-term care policy. If it looks good, I will say it's right for you. But I don't think that consumers know how to properly scrutinize the sales pitch here. And I think it's important to do that. Now, this is not to say all long-term care policies are bad. In fact, I've seen a lot of good ones. Where I think they fit the best is early in someone's retirement. Like if you, here's a common scenario, it's not common, but it's a scenario that is real. I have a client that's been through it. And it happens, I'm sure, pretty frequently. Client goes into the hospital, triple bypass. All right. Surgery isn't great. The client doesn't recover so quickly. gets discharged from the hospital, goes into a long-term care facility. All right. They're there for 60 days. Medicare benefits stop. All right. What happens next? Well, what happens next in this scenario is their long-term care paid the benefits. All right. So they literally got paid. They got $30,000 in value. All right. So, this happened to pretty much refund all their premiums that they put into that policy. Great. All right. Where it doesn't work, though, is if you took those premiums, like I did the math on this, if you took the premiums where they bought that policy in the early 50s, I think mid 50s, and they just put that into like an IRA or a Roth, and you just let earnings grow, actually it did better if they let that happen and then they took the long-term care need out like at 80. The only time it works well is if your long-term care need tends to take place early on in your retirement. I don't know if I'm making sense, but
Well, I think the risk though is like what happens. Like I totally agree that if you math it out, I mean, because this is what the insurance company is doing. They're selling you long-term care. They're going to invest the money, and they're betting on average that they're going to make a higher return investing the money than they're going to pay you using the. I mean, they wouldn't do it if that wasn't the bet,
it wasn't
right?
profitable.
So I think the risk to you as an individual is like okay, great, Ben. If returns are 10% per year every year, in sequence for the rest of my retirement, then I'm going to have more money than that. But what happens if I need long-term care in the middle of 2008? Like what so happens if I both need long-term care and the market is in a mess at the same time? And I think that's like when we run a financial plan, what you'll notice when you add the long-term care expenses in is it doesn't necessarily drop like the assets in an average market at the end of plan that much. In an average market, the long-term care works out great and whatnot, but it can impact the statistics because, out of the 1,000 scenarios that you run, there are a handful of those scenarios where like the market was down at the same time as you 5x your withdrawal rate and it kind of squeezes you. So now I would say that the vast majority of the clients that we work with that have money have gotten that money through investing over a long period of time. And so it tends to be that they kind of gravitate towards self-insuring, leaving their money invested. They feel like they have more money than they need up front. And so there is, like you said, some level of padding there to make sure that they're not stuck either way. And as painful as it is to send the money to the insurance company as opposed to your kids, right, let's not forget that to that detriment, there's also a potential benefit, which is more growth, less insurance costs, and things like that. So I think to your point earlier, it's not a one size fits all thing. I mean, you really have to.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. It's never a one size fits all when it comes to finance. It's always case specific. But in my profession, I find that most of my clients do not need to worry about long-term care insurance. Most of them don't. Now, a few of them do. What I mean by that is, they can easily absorb the cost of long-term care. A lot of folks think, I don't know why they think this, but they think that like the nursing home just takes all your money. I'm working with a couple, over $3 million net worth, and the assumption is I got to give that all to the nursing home. That's not how it
probably
works.
Take 10 or 15,000 a month.
So skilled care, like this is the highest level. Like you almost like you're almost a vegetable at this point when you need skilled care. Well, this is the condition most people are afraid of. Where you cannot perform. Either you have a significant cognitive issue like dementia, Alzheimer's, something like that, or you can't do 2 out of the 6 activities of daily living. So this is, you're very dependent on other people and you need ongoing medical supervision. So this is basically the next step after this is hospice care. All right. So skilled care, according to the financial planning system I use, Right Capital, it costs $127,000 per person per year. Very expensive. We can all agree with that. But let's back to that scenario, $3 million net worth. Let's say, 700,000 is in the home, $2.3 million in liquid net worth, just a 5% return on that is enough to pay for that nursing home. Okay. So the other component that we have to consider is they're also getting Social Security, probably a pension. All right. There's enough cash flow to sustain that almost indefinitely. So, you don't need to worry about it. You're not going to lose your money to the nursing
I
home.
wouldn't say you don't need to worry about it, but you should plan for it, right? You should have a plan. You should be confident in your ability to tackle these expenses. And if your preference is to define it through insurance, then, you can potentially, assuming you can qualify, you can define it.
Yes.
If you're okay with a little less definition and some variability for some growth potential, then that's okay too.
And I would default to that. If like you're on the fence, I would default to that latter simply because I think that the landscape of healthcare over the next decade is going to change significantly.
Preserves your optionality, I suppose.
Yes.
But
anyway, I think we've talked about that topic enough. So let's go ahead and close up this episode with the listener Q&A and tip of the week. So the question I got this week that ties into this whole idea of long-term care is, client asks, all my neighbors are putting their homes in trusts or giving them to their kids. Should I do that too? So I don't know if you want to handle that or if you want me to.
Well, I'd like more information. Tell me more
about this particular client.
No. But so what kinds of trusts are these?
Well, just general. So the client doesn't know. So what I suspect, given the way the question is framed here, is that, some of her neighbors are using what were commonly called Medicaid trusts, where, essentially the individual that is putting the name into the trust is trying to make themselves look poor on paper. So the idea
here is that if you don't have any money,
Medicaid pays for your long-term care.
The government pays for your care.
Yes. And in most states, now Medicaid is controlled by each state. So the federal government provides each state Medicare money or Medicaid money, and then the state doles that out in its specific Medicaid program. This is actually a big part of the Big Beautiful Bill, where they talked about, people losing Medicaid benefits, yada, yada. So one of the major components of Medicaid is how it pays for long-term care for folks who don't have money. And how they determine if you don't have money or not is you file a Medicaid application. And on that application, that you have to disclose assets and gifts made within the past 5 years. So there's, in the state of Ohio at least, and most states follow this formula, there's a 5-year look back. Meaning if you've given any money over the past 5 years.
You can't do this reactively.
You cannot, yes.
Like the question that we get as advisors, here's what's hard, right? Is you get a client that calls you and they say, my grandfather, or my dad, or it's generally somebody, higher up in the family tree. They are, potentially needing care and we're worried, they've got a house, they've got a retirement account. We don't want to lose that. Can we shelter that stuff? And actually it used to be you could.
Yes, you could. Yeah.
Used to be you could. And basically the government got wise to people doing this. So they put a 5-year look back. So you can put the money into a trust and hide it for Medicaid purposes, but it's not going to actually look like it's gone for the next 5 years. Right. So if you need the care next year.
Yeah, you shouldn't do this.
You can't do it.
But also too, these Medicaid trusts are very restrictive. So, and you cannot serve as a I'm not going to get into the legal aspects of this because that's getting beyond the scope of what we should be talking about. But just know that there's a lot of drawbacks to doing this. But
predominantly, I think we're okay to say this. Once that money's in the trust, the point is the money's not yours.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
That's the whole point.
Like a lot of times these trusts, the beneficiary, the money is actually, once the money's in the trust, a lot of times the money is the kids or whoever's the beneficiary of the trust. And so if you don't have a really good trusting relationship with your kids or whatever, this could get very, very messy.
Yes, it could. And you also lose out in doing this on the step up in basis. And since the trust isn't technically, or your kids aren't the primary home, it's not their primary home. Now capital gains tax is involved. So there's a lot of downside to doing this. If you do this, I'm not saying you shouldn't, but there is a laser specific case for doing this. And
I have seen this in practice, and I've seen this work in practice, but it's very important that you have a coordinated team that involves a financial advisor to invest the money, a CPA to direct the taxability of everything, and then also an attorney to make sure the legal structure is set up. Those three people have to kind of be on the same page, because the advisor that's investing the money needs to be aware of the tax impact and the legal impact of what they're doing. The attorney needs to know what's going on with things, and it has to be drafted correctly with the right provisions. And the CPA has to make sure that the taxes are getting attributed the right way.
So don't go to a seminar and reactively meet with an attorney that promises to, do a Medicaid trust for you for whatever price, and
I'm not saying don't. I'm just saying, realize that it's not as simple as just reactively doing it. There are drawbacks. The clients that we've worked with, where working with a CPA, an attorney, and a financial advisor all the time comes with a cost, right? So there's added cost, added complexity. You want to make sure that the juice is worth the squeeze.
Yes. So to answer this question concisely, I think I would say probably not, but give us a call. We'll talk about it, because there is a case where it may be useful to you. So, but I would say for most people, this is probably
it just hinges on a lot of
and then let's finish out with the tip of the week. So you got a good tip of the week, I think.
Well, last podcast we talked about benefits enrollment. We ended out with our tip being investing your HSA, I believe is what we talked about. And so today we've talked a lot about investing the HSA, of course, but also just general healthcare costs and what have you. So I think kind of using these as maybe a little bit of a tease to the next episode, we thought, gosh, rates are dropping. A lot of people have bought houses in the last few years. I know us with clients, we're pretty actively aware of kind of where clients' mortgage rates are and helping them refinance. And one of the biggest mistakes that I see again and again when it comes to refinancing or just getting a mortgage in general is not understanding the difference between closing costs, upfront fees, basically, and interest costs, right? The long-term interest rate.
Yes.
And so what I think it's important people recognize is that there's kind of this teeter-totter effect. The mortgage person gets paid, or the mortgage institution gets paid in two ways. They make interest and they make fees up front, right? And the higher the interest rate, the lower the fees up front. The higher the fees up front, the lower the interest rate, right? When one goes up, the other goes down. And so for clients that we work with, especially with today's rate environment where rates have been higher and they're gradually coming down, we want clients to be positioned to refinance again.
Yes.
And any of I guess the bottom line here is, let's say you go get a mortgage tomorrow, you're going to refinance your house, and the mortgage broker says, hey, I can give you a 6.2% rate with no fees up front, or a 6% rate with $5,000 of fees up front, right? Which one do you choose? And what you really want to recognize is, if you choose doorway 2, I'm going to pay $5,000 to get a 6% rate. And if 6 months from now, rates are lower and you potentially want to refinance again, that $5,000
sunk cost
is sunk.
Yeah.
Right. So what we typically are encouraging our clients to do is pay less cost up front, take a slightly higher interest rate because of that, and position themselves to be able to redo that in the future, potentially with no cost, or if it's at some point, because there are times where it makes sense to pay a lot of closing costs for a lower rate. If you plan to stay in the home for a long time, if you think rates are going to go up in the future, like if it was 2020 again, and you knew you were going to stay in your house for 20 years, go ahead and pay some closing costs and bring your rate down to 2% from 2.5%. But right now, with the rate environment that we're in, we are talking to clients a lot about how to reduce closing costs, take a slightly higher interest rate, and be positioned to redo it. Do you have anything to add? What else?
No, I think that's perfect. And, be aware of closing costs as rates decline. So, what we suggest to recap the recommendation is just go with the zero closing cost loan.
Well, and shop your options, right? Like there are, in the world of mortgages, a lot of people just go to their bank and they're like, well, I do my checking accounts there, so it'll be a lot easier to get a mortgage. Well, that is not actually true. So you can get a mortgage from many different institutions, banks, credit unions, savings and loans, all this different stuff. There's kind of two types of mortgages out there. There's the mortgages that are pricing competitive. If you have good credit, you're a well-qualified buyer, there are mortgage companies out there that want to compete for your business on price, giving you better deals. If your credit is worse, your financial position is worse, then you might have to go to whatever institution you can go to get approved. You really want to make sure, though, regardless of which position that you're in, that you do a little bit of shopping, because having worked with clients in these situations time and time again, I mean, there's thousands of dollars of savings to be had in doing this well.
Definitely. Well, Brent, thanks for the tip, and I'm actually going to take you up on that myself.
We'll talk more about it next week.
Yep, we will. All right, thanks for listening to the Money Alchemist podcast. All our notes are in the show notes. It's a great way to connect with Brent and myself. If you could use a meeting and talk about this stuff more specifically to your situation, well, catch you next time.
Hold on. Before you stop. All right, well, welcome to the Money Alchemist podcast. I'm your host, Brent Gargano.
And I'm Ben Jones.
And today, we kind of wanted to circle back. Last podcast, a couple of weeks ago, we talked about benefits enrollment, and we gave a tip at the end talking about how to save and invest your HSA. So we thought it was prescient here to maybe go ahead and unpack the cost of healthcare, how to plan for healthcare, how to plan for long-term care. So we're excited to share with you.
Opinions voiced in this podcast are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. All performance referenced is historical and is no guarantee of future results. All indices are unmanaged and may not be invested into directly. Investing involves risks, including the potential loss of principal. To determine which strategies or investments may be suitable for you, consult the appropriate qualified professional prior to making a decision. Advisory services offered through National Wealth Management Group, LLC.